everyone, this is Des, and you are listening to the Wellness Project powered by Spotlight Coalition. I have some very exciting news to share. For the first time ever, I am offering a group program. I realize that many people are stressed, burned out, overwhelmed, and just plain exhausted. Sadly, many people don't have support from others, a healthy outlet, or a way to cope with the stresses of their everyday lives. If you can relate, then don't hesitate to sign up for the Mindful Monday Power Up group. This 4-week group will not only give you the support and encouragement you've been craving, but it will also provide you with a safe space to express yourself, healthy coping skills, practical tips you can implement into your daily life, and that sense of community you've been longing for. Create a life you love. Sign up for the waitlist today. You can find the link in the show notes, and I can't wait to see you there. On today's episode, I speak with Nichole Hausen. She is a mental health advocate, and she speaks about mental illnesses, specifically mental wellness, bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety, and PTSD. She's been published 10 times for The Mighty, and she's been interviewed by CBC and CTV News. She ran a mental health blog called Defying Shadows with 15 other mental health advocates. She was diagnosed as a teen with depression and anxiety, and in her 20s with bipolar disorder. Nichole strives to support those who struggle with their mental health, and she aims to destroy all stigma surrounding mental illness. I'm really looking forward to you hearing this interview because we haven't talked too much about bipolar disorder on this show, and I think it's so important to talk about because I think it's often misunderstood and people aren't that well educated about bipolar disorder. So I'm really looking forward to you hearing this interview with Nichole. I do just want to put a trigger warning here that Nichole does discuss 2 suicide attempts, but she does not go into detail. So I think it's okay for you to listen to. So use your own judgment on that. But just so you know, she doesn't get too much into that. She just mentions them. So I'm really looking forward to hearing this interview with Nichole. I don't want to delay any longer. So let's welcome Nichole. Everyone, I am here with Nichole Hausen. Nichole, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm really looking forward to speaking with you today. So just as an introduction so that our listeners could get to know you a bit more, can you tell me where you're from, growing up with the mental health issues that you had, and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am from Essex, Ontario, right across from the Detroit border. Grew up on a dairy farm, grew up with depression and anxiety, commonly talked about in my house, at least at this point. And I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder in 2014 after 2 suicide attempts. So I have been living with it for a little while, but I've learned how to manage it and how to deal with it since then. And now I run a successful social media marketing and virtual assistance agency.
Oh, wow. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing that. So can you let us know what it was like growing up with depression and anxiety? And did you have any idea that you had bipolar disorder, or was that a surprise to you when you were diagnosed?
We talked about me having sad days or being anxious a little bit more so as a teenager, but we didn't really understand a lot about mental health in the sense that we understood like what a manic episode is. And so looking back, we can see clear signs that I was having manic episodes, and it makes sense to us now. But at the time, we didn't really understand that. We did understand it was that I had depression and anxiety. And so understanding that I was a little bit sad sometimes, and that's not at all necessarily what depression looks like, but that's kind of how we dealt with it. And I had therapy and I did different things. I was decided to be unmedicated at that point in time. But I kind of grew up knowing that depression and anxiety was a thing.
Okay. And so I think that anxiety and depression are way more well known. People know about them. They're almost kind of buzzwords in society today. I feel like a lot of people almost throw those phrases around, but I think a lot of people still aren't really knowledgeable or educated about bipolar disorder. So would you be open to sharing a little bit about what bipolar disorder is and how it affected you growing up?
Absolutely, of course. I was diagnosed in 2014. I was 20 something. So I was diagnosed after a major manic episode and then 2 suicide attempts after that. We got the diagnosis, and then looking back and seeing when I was acting in super uncharacteristic kind of ways to what I normally would be. As a teenager, it just looked like I was like, oh, go getter, you're doing amazing things. And I was volunteering and co-oping at places and interning and doing high school and all the things. And it just looked like I was a really great go-getter. I was on the news and stuff for things that I was like, yeah, look at me go. Looking back, I'm like, oh my gosh, I was so manic. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't taking care of myself. It wasn't me at all. It was interesting to look back now, knowing that. My major manic episode that happened was 2013 to 2014. And I ended up packing up my home and all my stuff and moving 8 hours away from my family. Tried to restart my life up there. Made a lot of decisions that I normally wouldn't have made. That were very uncharacteristic for me. Spent a lot of money that I did not have and made a lot of poor choices. And then eventually what goes up must come down at some point. And so when I crashed, I got super depressed and then ended up having my attempts.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. And I've heard from some people that I've worked with bipolar disorder that they're a little resistant, some of them, to taking medications because they actually really like those highs of the manic episodes. Can you speak to that at all? Do you feel that way or have any experience with that?
I get where people are coming from, and for sure, I mean, I would love to be Superwoman all the time and be able to do all the things. But for me, being manic had more negative downfalls to it than it did positive. Sure, I'm not doing all the things, but I'm still doing amazing things when I am stable and I'm making healthy decisions for myself, for the people around me. I'm not hurting people in the process. And so for me, taking medication makes sense for me because I don't want to hurt other people in the process of having a manic episode. And I know that that's possible. So I just don't make that a possibility for me.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's very interesting people's different perspective when it comes to their mental health and their mental illnesses, which is why I'm trying to interview a lot more people that have had those struggles and are recovering, because I think it's really good for people to hear all these different perspectives. I think it's really important.
Absolutely.
So, can you speak to a little bit about your family growing up? Were they aware that you were struggling with your mental health? Were they supportive of it?
Yeah, so they were definitely aware. Looking back, we didn't talk about it in the way that we do now. There wasn't that understanding of, oh, Nichole's doing this because of her depression or because of her anxiety. It was just Nichole's being a bad kid. Nichole's overreacting. Talking about it now, we understand a little bit more, but it just wasn't something that we fully understood at that point in time.
Okay. And I've been hearing that a lot from people that I've been interviewing, them saying that their families just didn't know about these mental health struggles. So do you think there's a lack in education with mental health?
Yes, for sure. And we're getting better at it. We're educating a lot more now. But for the first little bit, the first half of my life, I don't think we talked about it very much at all. And it wasn't something we commonly talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think it's becoming much more common. And especially in schools too, they're really pushing social emotional learning because I think everybody's realizing what an issue it is. And we just don't have the education or the words for people to describe their experience. So I think it is getting better. And especially, like people like you that are speaking out and discussing the struggles that you had with your mental health and mental illness. I think that's really helpful in educating people as well. And are you open at all to speaking about your two suicide attempts?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very vocal about all of my struggles and my situations because I know that there's other people out there that are going through similar situations. And it helps to hear from somebody who's been there and has made it through to the other side. And so I do talk about it. I don't share how I did it because honestly, that's not something anybody really needs to know. I ended up getting very, very depressed. And I went to the hospital multiple times to say, I'm not okay. I need support and I need help. Unfortunately, the hospital that I was going to was not equipped with the right tools and people to support me. And so they sent me home. And so this happened several times over the course of a month, to the point where I just felt like I had no other choice. I'd reached out, I'd asked for help, and I wasn't getting anything. And so I attempted the first time. They held me overnight, released me the next morning to a guy that I had met on a dating app a couple days earlier, and sent me home. So that night I attempted a second time. At that point, I texted a family friend to ask them to apologize to my parents and say, like, I'm sorry, and I just can't do this anymore. And so at that point, my family friend contacted my parents. My parents got in the car and started driving, and they drove to the hospital. They didn't know anything about how I was doing or what was happening or anything else. They didn't even admit me to the hospital, actually, the second time. They stuck me in a room with a friend of mine, and we sat there, and my parents showed up 8 hours later, packed up all my belongings and everything for the place that I was staying, and brought me back home. And it wasn't until a few days later that we ended up making it in to see a crisis worker that we met a psychiatrist who diagnosed me with bipolar disorder.
Okay. Oh, wow. I'm so sorry you experienced that and that there wasn't support in place to help you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I hear that a lot that people go to the hospital, they're either turned away or discharged right away, that there's not really help for people. So, what do you think would have been helpful for you in that moment that you were asking for help?
Yeah, I think honestly what I needed was somebody to hear me and see that I wasn't just a college student that was missing home, but I was actually genuinely struggling. As soon as I sat down and explained my situation to somebody who could actually hear me, it was obvious that something was wrong here. And looking at stuff, like I was on so many different kinds of medications, I was having migraines, I was on antidepressants and all sorts of things. And so when I met with the psychiatrist, we handed her the bag of pills that I had been taking over the course of several months. And she looked at me, she goes, Nichole, this was not your fault. And it was like a weight got lifted off my shoulders, because I was like, oh my gosh, like, really? I needed somebody to see that I wasn't okay and I was struggling. And then getting a name for what I was feeling was really helpful. I kind of just accepted it as is. I know a lot of people, when they get a diagnosis, they're like, oh no, that's probably not me. And I went through maybe 3 days of that where I was like, oh no, I don't think I had bipolar disorder. But it just made so much sense that I was like, yeah, you know what, actually, that sounds about right. Knowing that and getting that diagnosis was a big changer for me.
Wow. And can you explain how that diagnosis impacted your life?
It definitely changed the way that I see myself. I could never understand why I would have such drastic mood changes, and that I didn't feel like I had control over my emotions and that sort of thing. So getting that diagnosis was really helpful to understand why. And then with that became the process of, okay, how do I deal with this? So medication is a really great way to help stabilize the mood, but I still have to manage my own emotions and everything else in a healthy way. And so going to therapy regularly and doing all the things for myself to learn more about myself and what that looks like and what bipolar disorder is and how it affects different people, doing all that was a really big piece to me growing and turning into the person I am now.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And would you be open to sharing some of those steps that you took? So, after your attempts, after you got diagnosed, what were the next steps in your life to start your recovery and your healing?
So I ended up going to a wellness program. It was a outpatient program, so I had to go for 3 weeks, Monday to Friday. And so I would go in and we'd learn all sorts of things about mental health, like depression, anxiety, panic attacks, everything. All the things that I had been dealing with for so long, and I didn't understand a lot of them. It was more of an educational piece, but then learning things like self-care, understanding all these different pieces to how you can like calm yourself and learn all these techniques. That was a big piece. I was in part of a bipolar support group where they specifically taught on bipolar disorder, what it's like. We all obviously know what it's like to live with it, but to how to deal with it and how to make sense and why some people react differently than other people. Understanding all of that was a really huge piece too. And then just regular therapy with the right person. It took me a long time to find the right therapist that really helped. But I just actually just met with her on Tuesday morning, and we were talking about how amazing, how far I've come, and literally just the last year, being able to manage my emotions and my feelings and being confident in myself and that sort of thing.
Oh, that's amazing. That's really, really good to hear. I'm really, really happy for you. That's amazing. I think you brought up an important point, which I've talked about on this podcast before, is that it's so important for people to hear that it might take some time to find the right therapist. You know, you have to find somebody who's the right fit for you. And I think a lot of people go once and they get discouraged and they don't try again. So I try to tell people it's not always the right fit. Give it a try with the person, maybe discuss with the therapist what's working, what isn't working. But a lot of people end up giving up. So what gave you the determination to keep trying different therapists?
I'm not gonna lie, there was times that I did give up, and I say that in quotations because obviously I still ended up finding a therapist that works for me. But there was time that I went for a year, 2 years without a therapist just because I was like, this isn't working for me. This isn't helping me. I did a lot of research on my own of what kind of therapists would be best to talk to me about bipolar disorder and looked into different therapists and different ways that they treat their patients and that sort of thing. It was honestly, I knew I needed that support. And I had to believe that there was some way to get that support because I was not going to try to do it all on my own.
Right. Do you have any tips for people on how to find a therapist that's a good fit for them?
I would say do your research. I did the same thing with my psychiatrist. I did some research and I figured out which ones are they specialize in bipolar disorder. And so knowing that from the get-go has been really helpful because I know they understand what I'm living with, at least in a educational side of things and the book knowledge of what it's like to live with bipolar disorder. And so I don't have to explain to myself in that way. I don't have to explain, well, it's because of my bipolar disorder that this happened, but also I want to learn how to deal with it myself. It helped find somebody that was specialized in that area. And so I would recommend you do that.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Can you speak to at all if your anxiety or depression or bipolar disorder impacted the relationships in your life, whether romantic relationships, family relationships?
Yeah, so when I was manic, it definitely did. It tore my family apart and caused a lot of issues with extended family and with my immediate family. So that was really hard. And honestly, it just didn't make sense to anybody. This quiet little girl that had been in Bible college up and moved away with a boyfriend to the other side of the province. It was like, what is happening? It didn't make any sense. We were able to repair that, and with the diagnosis we're like, okay, this makes sense and this is what it is. And then it just meant rebuilding some trust and saying, okay, this is what we're going to do next time if we think that you might be having a manic episode, so we can protect ourselves. And I've had conversations with like my best friend and said, hey, if I'm manic, I'm going to tell you that I'm manic, but I'm probably going to stay away from you and the kids for a little bit because I don't want her children to grow up knowing me as the auntie that was manic. I want them to remember auntie that comes over and plays with them and is really sweet and kind and all of that.
Oh, great. So, as for your loved ones, is there anything that you can say to people that have a loved one that has bipolar disorder, how they can help, how they could support that person? Are there any tips or advice you would give to somebody?
I think communication is one of the biggest pieces. If you can communicate with them and support them in them communicating. There is times that I will look at my family and say, okay, you guys, I know that I'm being completely unreasonably cranky right now. And I don't know what it is. I know I am. I just need a little bit of extra grace because I am moody and I'm trying to get grasp my feelings and my mood. I'm struggling. Being able to communicate that and then them having grace is a huge thing because then I'm not walking around going, oh my gosh, I feel so guilty. And I will always come back and apologize if I hurt somebody and or treat somebody poorly just because of my mental health. I always come back and apologize. And so that's really important to know, but giving that grace in the process is really helpful.
Okay, I think that's really good to know because I think a lot of people don't know how to help and they want to help. And I think it just makes a lot of people feel kind of helpless in that situation because they don't know what to do, but they want to do something. So thank you for that. I think that's really helpful for people to hear. And what do you think that people need to know or be educated on when it comes to depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder? Are there things that you think that people don't know that they should know about these mental illnesses?
One of the things that I didn't even realize was the thing at first is that people will say, like, oh, Nichole is bipolar. It's interesting how we reframe it. Instead of saying Nichole is bipolar, Nichole has bipolar disorder. Nichole has depression. Nichole has anxiety. I am not my mental illness. I just happen to have a mental illness. And that's a really big distinguishing fact because when you can start saying, okay, this is a part of who I am in that sense, but it doesn't define me. That's a huge thing for you to internally be able to deal with. It just reframes the whole conversation.
Yes, absolutely. I fully agree with that. Thank you. I think that people have to take that to heart because I know it's become kind of a habit, just saying those kind of things. I think it's become kind of ingrained. So I think that that's really good for people to hear and to become aware of that and just the language that they're using when it comes to mental health. Absolutely. So, what advice or tips do you have for those that are struggling with their mental health?
One day at a time. One day at a time, do something for yourself every single day, even if that means canceling your entire day and spending it in bed. That is okay. And sometimes that's what's needed, and that's all right. Surround yourself with the people that are going to support you and help you in that process, but do what you have to do to take care of yourself.
Thank you for that. I know that you are a big advocate for those with mental health struggles. Can you tell us how you advocate for those that are struggling with their mental health?
Yeah, so for quite a few years, I ran a mental health blog. It's still up there. It's called Defying Shadows. And so we had a group of women writing posts on their experiences and that sort of thing. And I write for The Mighty as well. And so they talk about chronic illness and mental health issues and that sort of thing. Besides that, I just do a lot of podcasts and things like that just to be able to share experience, posting on YouTube and that sort of thing.
Oh, that's great. That's so amazing. Nichole, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much. Can you tell all of our listeners where to find you?
Yeah, so I am on almost every social media platform because that is my job. So you can find me just by searching my name, honestly, Nichole Hausen, and my handle is Nichole Hausen across every platform, actually. So pretty easy to find.
Okay, perfect. And everyone, I'm going to put Nichole's links in the show notes. So definitely check those out. Nichole, thank you so much. Is there anything else you want to share or want our listeners to hear today?
I guess just don't give up. We all need you here, and it's really better days come, even on the days that it doesn't feel like they will.
Thank you, Nichole. Thank you so much for being here today and sharing your story. I really, really appreciate it. And I know our listeners do as well.
Thanks for having me.
Nichole, thank you so much for coming on and speaking about your diagnoses and your struggles growing up with mental health issues. I really, really appreciate it. And I think it's so, so important for people to know. And that is why I was so looking forward to speaking with you. Everyone, go check out Nichole. All of her links are in the show notes. I would really appreciate it if you would share this episode with a friend or family or loved one, or just on your social media. Be sure to tag me at The Wellness Project with Des. And I would also greatly appreciate it if you would go into iTunes and leave me a review. It's really helpful in helping my podcast to grow. Also, if you haven't had the opportunity, go sign up for my newsletter because I will be in your inbox every week with challenges, mental health tips, behind the scenes of the podcast, and you will be the first to know what I have going on when it comes to PDFs or courses or journals or anything like that. So make sure you sign up for my newsletter. The link is in the show notes. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I will talk to you soon.